I'll do it, John.
Okay, we are recording. I think we have to tell people, right? We are recording this meeting. And
Thank
for the
you.
purpose of the recording, I just gave a fantastic introduction. And you can see the agenda is on the screen. So, okay, I'm going to ask that unless you absolutely cannot hold back just a question of vocabulary or clarification, please wait until the end for the questions. We'll have half an hour for that, at least. Okay, here's on one page. If the power went out 1 minute from now and there was only one page, this is what we've concluded overall on one page. First, we've identified a wide range of options, and we've carefully studied 7 of them. I'm sorry, carefully studied several of them, 3. But at this point, all of the options, the 3 that we've studied carefully, plus the other 5 that we've thought about, all of them have significant barriers to implementation. And so we're not ready to recommend any of the 8. And so we're not yet recommending anything. We're just telling you what we've discovered. We're not saying that these could never be recommended. We're just saying that right now, we don't know. We don't have confidence that any of these could succeed, and we'll explain exactly why, what the factors are. And so therefore, we hope our work over the next several months and feedback from the community will help us narrow down the list of possible options for the town and the village to consider. That's it in a nutshell. The rest of it is now detail. So I'm going to keep going. All right, so now let's give you the update on what work have we done and what have we learned from it. Now, we've done a ton of work, but we're just going to summarize it on one page. First, a couple of years ago, we held public discussions to identify the initial preferences for town hall. In particular, should we keep it? Should we keep it doing what it does? Should we repurpose it? I think there was a proposal to make a music college or a music conservatory out of the building. People said we should tear it down, we should turn it into housing, we should sell it. The consensus, a pretty clear consensus, was to keep the building and to keep the purposes of the building. So that was the first thing that we did and that we learned. We've launched a silent fundraising campaign, a silent phase. You know, as the first part of any fundraising campaign is a silent phase where you try to find lead donors to pay for exploratory work and ultimately to help fund construction costs. And we have commitments for about $4 million from a relatively small group of lead donors who are willing to donate. And that group has paid for all of the costs of the exploration so far. There have been no taxpayer dollars spent yet on this project. We use those funds to retain an architectural firm, Black River Design. They do a lot of work in Vermont, including for municipalities. We retained structural engineers, geotechnical engineers, which turn out to be really important, unfortunately, and a theater design firm, as we said, at no cost to the taxpayers. We identified, with their help and with a fair bit of work, we identified the needs of the building itself. You know, the light bulb is out, the part of the building is actually falling off. We identified the needs of the building and of the building's occupants, the municipal staff and Pentangle. And we spent a lot of time, those groups spent a lot of time thinking carefully, what is it that we really would need and what do we want? We developed 3 detailed options that maintain, all of which may, yeah. I think we need to make somebody. Oh, someone, Wendy or Jill.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, there we go. See that? You just say it and it happens. We developed 3 detailed options. You're going to see 8 options tonight, but we developed 3 in detail. And then we've sort of come to the point that we don't think that any of the 3 yet are feasible. So we've started to generate some others. And all 3 of those maintain this building with its current uses, all 3 uses, cultural, municipal, community, and they enhance the functionality of the building to different degrees. And we identified then a broader range of options that we're going to present tonight as well. So that's what we did over the last, again, this is 2 years, 2.5 years of work condensed onto one page. But just to give you a rough sense of it. And here's what we learned. We learned 8 things. Okay. First, as I said, the community would like to preserve the 3 main uses of town hall. I'm sure not every single person wants exactly that. And some people clearly are willing to say, well, if it costs a fortune to maintain it, then maybe it would be okay to move it or to do something else or to narrow down the uses. But I think everyone in their heart of hearts, all things being equal, would like to maintain it. And that's, as I said, the first thing that we learned. The second thing that we learned is that Town Hall has serious structural issues. Now I'm going to go through most of these points in more detail. So I'm just going to leave this and I'll come back to it. But I can tell you that there are serious structural problems with the building. Third is that along with the structure, the HVAC and parts of other systems need replacing, and the air quality does not meet current standards. That's particularly relevant at a time when we're all wearing masks and wondering about whether or not it's okay to attend a movie or to attend Mamma Mia. We'll tell you a little bit of information about the HVAC system in this building that is going to concern many people, as it should. Fourth, and this won't surprise any of you, that ADA access needs to be improved. The building is not as ADA accessible as it can be or should be. Now, again, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. This should surprise no one. Construction costs during this project have risen dramatically, and so early estimates that we had have been far exceeded by the estimates that we are currently getting or that we recently got. Again, that should surprise no one. Sixth, major donors are willing to contribute. There's some real enthusiasm, but it's unclear how much we can raise for the different options. There's a very complicated interaction between, some donors want more of this and some donors want more of that. And we may or may not, and if we can't do more of this, then that donor would want to still participate, but maybe not quite give as much, and vice versa. And it's the same with taxpayers and the same with community members. So it's a complicated equation, and we'll talk a little bit about what those interactions are. But that's an important factor that we learned, and that is affecting how we make these decisions. Seventh, the opportunity for grants, federal and state funding could be significant, but they're not yet clear. We all know today, 2 hours ago, the infrastructure bill was signed by President Biden. We know that there's another bill in the works. We know that there were state programs that were started before the infrastructure bill was passed. We don't know, Allison, you know more than the rest of us, but I don't think you would say with certainty, here's what we could get for Town Hall. We hope that over the next months, not years, that will become more evident. And there is a potential for there to be enough money available to make a difference to our decision making. But there's also, I think, the potential, maybe you could disagree, we haven't talked about this, there's also the potential that it won't make that much of a difference to it because there's so many needs that go around. Would that be a fair way to describe it? So Allison, for those of the remote or shake, is agreeing. So it's an unknown, and it's an important unknown that we hope will become clearer. And lastly, and this is despite the other 7 pointing towards the need for time to consider things. Over time, we can figure these things out, but we may be under some time pressure to take some actions if we want to maintain the use of the theater in the short term. Because there are 2 aspects to the theater, which I'll explain: the air quality and the structural problems, which affect particularly the theater. And so if we want to continue to be able to use the theater, we may have to do something in the interim that wouldn't be the ideal project, but would be the fast project. And that choice is going to be a tough one to make as well. And one of the options is the fast option. The other ones are longer, take longer. So that's what we've learned. That's the work we did, and that's what we've learned. Okay, and I'm just going to go through this very quickly, because I think the points are pretty clear. What we've learned: the community wants to preserve the 3 main uses. The community uses the building. There's a picture of school kids doing performances here. There's cultural events, obviously movies and live theater, civic events as we're having tonight. Okay, serious structural issues. There are reports from the structural and geotechnical engineers. They're available. Where's Jill Rose? They are available on the project website, which is, Jill is going to hope to keep shaking her head, yes, WoodstockTHRP.org. Woodstock Town Hall Renovation Project, WoodstockTHRP.org. And this slide is just one slide taken from these. What this is a picture that you're looking at is the side of Town Hall, the west side of Town Hall from the Blue Horse Inn. And you can see the Town Hall, and then a little bit lighter in the back, you see that rectangle with the arrow pointing to it, that's the stage building. It was added on in 1927. Is that when it was added? I think 1928. And almost immediately it began to separate from the main building because the ground under it is not as solid as it needs to be. And over the years, it has moved. Currently, the gap at the top between is about 4 inches.
3.
That's a lot. It's still structurally sound. But, and I think this is on the next page. Yeah, so the stage house has, we call it stage house, that's that column, has separated from the main block. With a major event, which is somewhat undefined, but the terms that were used verbally in our meetings with the geotechnical and the structural engineers were, high winds or very, I mean, not just like a windy day, but very high winds or a seismic event or a flood, which, by the way, we've had 7 since this was built. Safety could be compromised, which could be mitigated by making sure people were not in that end of the building during the event. So this is a serious issue. The building is not unsafe. And the part of the building that would be unsafe during an event is not this part of the building. It's which part is that? This part of the building.
Yeah. It's beyond that.
It's from the edge of the stage back. It's that column. And so we asked specifically, in fact, the day we had this information, if I remember correctly, Alita said, should we get everyone out of the building? And the answer was no, it's safe. But during an event, it may or may not be. And so we've put in place the current monitoring program. We monitor very, very precisely. I mean, we're not doing it. The engineers have set up a monitoring system so we can measure the most minuscule movements. And there's been no observable movement in the last 6 months. And it may be for much longer than that there hasn't been. We don't know. All of our options as we go forward will include continue, and we don't say this explicitly, so I'm saying it now. Every option we pursue will include continuing to monitor the movements of that building. Some type of weather watch safety protocol, which says, hey, in the next 24 hours, there's a chance of X, and therefore the theater is closed, or whatever we decide. And we will likely include basic engineering repairs, which the architects or the engineers have said could help to stabilize, and maybe could help to stabilize that part of the building. It's not a permanent solution, but it's something that if we're worried about safety and so forth, would be relatively inexpensive. It's basically reattaching the top with some kind of engineering solution, they called it. So we will be doing that in any of the options. We'll certainly doing the first 2 starting now. They don't cost anything, and we'll be, in fact, the first one we're doing, right, Bill? And the second one, I think we've talked about developing. So there's some serious structural issues that we need to consider when we're talking about the options. The HVAC systems need replacing, and the air quality does not meet current standards. Pentangle is saying to us, based on the HVAC experts, we don't know whether the system will last at all. It could fail at any moment. And I don't think they're just crying wolf. It might, I mean, I'm not an HVAC person. It didn't fail today, it didn't fail yesterday, but everyone is saying this is at the end of its life, and they're worried about whether or not we can continue to, use the theater if the system breaks down. But even if it doesn't break down, the current standard for cubic feet per minute of fresh air quality is 15 cubic feet per minute. Our system is 0. Our system does not circulate exterior air. It recirculates interior air. So I think for almost all of us who are alive at this moment in time, that's sort of not a good thing during COVID or during a pandemic. The World Cup, there may be a future requirement to have 21 cubic feet per minute. Some people are talking about having 30 cubic feet per minute. New systems can achieve those levels. So we have both a system that is at the end of its life, and a system that, even if it was working properly, is not designed to bring in fresh air. It needs to be replaced. And and it's expensive to do that. So the systems, the options that we're going to look at, include that if we stay in this building, which again, everyone wants to do. ADA access is a very complicated issue. Maybe some people know more about it than I do. I'm sure some do, but fundamentally once we start to do construction on the building, we're required by law to make certain changes. We want to make certain changes to make it as accessible for everyone as possible. Right now, the theater seats are not particularly accessible for people who don't have complete mobility. There isn't easy access to the stage from the dressing rooms. It requires going up a circular staircase. It's actually not easy access for someone who has full motion capability, but it's very difficult. The second floor restrooms out here are not ADA accessible. The basement restrooms need a little bit of modification to become ADA accessible. There is no ADA accessible access to the mezzanine for people who are running the controls, and the front entrance has ADA accessible entrance, but it's not in the same place as many of us are able to enter through the front door. And I think there's a lot of people who feel it would be most appropriate to be able to have everyone enter through the front door. There's a word for that. Universal access. I think that's important to a lot of people in the community. So we've learned that one part of this project is going to need to be to decide and deal with these shortcomings. Construction costs have risen dramatically. I'm not going to go into that in further detail. Let me talk a little bit about the donors. There's considerable enthusiasm. I don't want to diminish this at all. There's very significant enthusiasm for this project, for Rejuvenating Town Hall, and lead donors expect to contribute a majority of the funding. So, however, some lead donors want to pursue the most aspirational options to turn this building into what we're going to call, you'll see it in a few minutes, Plan A. And Plan A, which I'll explain in a few minutes, has everything that each group wanted, within reason, but it gives the municipal staff the layout and the functionality that they want. It gives Pentangle and live theater a significant improvement. It gives the community a very nice place to meet. It addresses all of the known ADA access issues. It's the building we would all want to have if we could afford it. And some of the lead donors are giving in order to achieve that. And they believe that funding from other donors, even though we've raised $4 million, that's not enough, but they believe other funding will come from the government, from other lead donors, and from them. Many of the lead donors have said, we'll increase our giving, with certain options. And there's also a factor that some lead donors want the taxpayers to share the burden appropriately. In other words, they don't want to pay for the whole thing. They feel that the taxpayers should pay for something. This is a municipal building. And we haven't done a survey of exactly what is appropriate and what's the right balance. I do think that the donors are prepared to pay more, half or more, but we haven't defined it further than that. And that's a factor as we think about, if we, as you'll see in a few minutes, the size of the taxpayers' funding for some of these projects. The more expensive the project, the more expensive the funding. The more expensive the project, the more donor support there is. So it's and we don't really know how that's going to play out, but I just want you all to be aware of what the dynamic is. The opportunity for grants and funding could be significant, but they're unclear. I don't think that needs further explanation. And we may be under some time pressure. And here's why. I think it should be obvious. There's a chance that the HVAC system will literally fail before we're able to fully implement some of these options. Some of these options will take 2 or 3 years. And, that given the state of the system, that's a meaningful worry to Pentangle that some of that, that it could fail before then. And as we talk about, there is no, even if it doesn't fail, the system isn't bringing fresh air into the building. So, so that's a concern. And then continuing to use the stage house in its structural condition is going to require at a minimum some safety protocols. Now we can implement those, but we're going to have to implement them until we solve the structural problem, which could be a long time. So there's some pressure. So acting sooner is all of the things being equal, which they probably won't be, is better than acting later. So that's what we've learned, the 8 things that we've learned. And again, we can go into, that's it. We're not going to go into more detail tonight on the details of these. But again, depending on I think over the next few weeks, we'll try to hear feedback and hear what people are interested in learning more about. I think we are well prepared to talk about these points for those of you that are interested in on what we've learned. And now we shift to, given what we've learned, here are the options that we're proposing. Okay, now, warning, please remain in your seats and no jumping. So that doesn't make sense. No jumping to conclusions.
You got a future and stand up.
We're about to present a range of options to be further analyzed. We are not recommending that we implement any of these options yet, because none are feasible at this point. I think we can say that with some comfort, that we're not comfortable yet, fully comfortable with any of the options. Further work is needed before recommendations and then decisions are made. So we're not asking for funding. We're not saying we want to do Plan B or Plan 6. Right. We will solicit feedback at our upcoming meetings, public meetings, and those meetings will primarily focus on feedback, unless people want to have more information briefings and dive deep on the structure, or if you want to see the architectural drawings for a couple of the plans that are developed to see what it would look like or what the seating arrangement would be and so forth. We have all of that. If that's what the community wants, and maybe you want all of it, and that would, or the select board of trustees, and that would be fine. Okay. Now, so the options, the 8 options. Now, I think I've given you a sense that there's lots of forces trying to affect these or affecting these options. And here's sort of a framework. Whoops. There are at least 5 major constituents for this project. There are the taxpayers. This is a municipal building. The taxpayers will have to pay something, even to get rid of it is not inexpensive. The municipal staff who are tenants here, and Pentangle who are tenants here. Major donors and community donors. And again, we have not opened up, in a fundraising campaign, you don't start with everyone, you start with a private phase. But eventually we will have a full community program for fundraising, and community donors will have their desires as the major donors do and as the tenants and the other constituents do. And these different constituents all have different, sorry, it's John Spector, Tess, to your question. These constituents have different points of view, and it's not one constituency to one point of view, but here are the kind of the 5 needs and desires that different groups are expressing. There's the theatrical interest. We want to have, a great stage and a great auditorium and a great set of dressing rooms and wings so that we can put on shows that we can't, and a sound system so we can attract more artists to more events to Woodstock to make it a stronger community. ADA access is obviously important to many people. Historical preservation is very important to people. This is an historical building. Sustainability is important. This is currently, not surprisingly, any building that hasn't been renovated for 40 years is not going to be up to current energy standards and efficiency and the air quality and so forth. So sustainability is very important, and cost is important. And so these are the factors as we try to put together these options. Okay, let's jump into the option. I think we're right on schedule. Option number 1, and apologies, we have 1 and we have A, B, and C, but 1, 2, and 3 are Plan A, B, and C. So Plan A, preserve the building and all of its uses with an outstanding theater, community center, and municipal home that meets all of our needs and aspirations. This is the full plan. And I'm going to show you some of the details of Plan A, B, and C. But Plan A is the aspirational plan. Plan B, preserve the building and all of its uses with a wide range of improvements. And I'll show you what things we took out of Plan A to get to Plan B. And then there is Plan C. I was a management consultant and taught that everything had to be in 3s. So we had to have a Plan C, which is another step down. Preserve the building and all of its uses with some improvements, but further things are taken out. And the costs, the A is the most expensive, B is next, C is next. So those are the first 3 plans. Let me show you these plans. Option 1, Plan A. I'm sorry, this is pretty small, but there are 5 categories of features. The first is structure and systems. In Plan A, we tear down the stage house and rebuild it with pilings. It is possible to build a structurally sound stage house on this property. We just need to go down, I think, 75 feet before we hit solid, and that's expensive, but it works. It's just expensive. And in Plan A, that's exactly what we do. We tear down the stage, we come up with a new stage, and one that you'll see in a minute is bigger, it has wings, and it has lots of features. We reinforce the main block, which needs a little bit of reinforcing. We put in an HVAC system that meets those future standards, not only the current standards, but the 30 cubic feet per minute. So in effect, if the world remains very concerned about air quality, we're going to be the place that people are going to want to come. And a riverfront patio, which kind of comes a little sort of at low cost because we have to have a little flat part of the building there to house some equipment. And it has a flat roof, and we get a nice patio that looks out over the river. It's not free, but it's very nice. The theater, new seating and improved sightlines, significant expansion of dressing rooms. For those of you who have been in the dressing rooms here, they're dressing room, I should say. There's not just dressing rooms, but a rehearsal room and a set production room, an expanded and improved lobby. We're going to move some things around in this plan to make the lobby much more attractive, and a loading dock to make operations much easier. Municipal staff, the clerk is, for those of you who have been in the clerk's office, they need more space. This would give them more space. They need more vault space. This plan gives them more vault space. We would move all of the offices to the 2nd floor. So the clerk would be moved up here and everything. We'd have a single municipal services on this level. The offices would be refurbished. The restrooms would be improved. We would build a break room, and we could fit all of this into the current footprint and still have a conference room roughly the size of the one that we have here. So that's sort of the best, municipal services we can provide. ADA access, all of the problems that I identified would be addressed. We'd have equal building access, that there'd be a way for everyone to come in the front door. The seating would be would have access. We'd have access to the stage from the seating area, access to the stage, ADA access to the stage from the dressing rooms, ADA accessible restrooms in the basement and the 2nd floor, ADA access to front row seats. In some of the plans, there's only ADA access to the back row seats for some complicated reasons, and ADA accessible backstage restrooms. And literally every function in the building would be ADA accessible. Is that a correct statement? That every function in the building would be ADA accessible? I think in Plan A, I think that is correct. I don't think we left anything out. That's Plan A. Sorry, there's one more section. Sustainability, more efficient HVAC and significantly improved insulation and so forth to obviously reduce energy costs. That's Plan A. That's the aspirational plan. It's the most expensive plan. And that's Plan A. In Plan B, we lose the HVAC meeting the future standards. Instead, we substitute the HVAC meeting current standards. We don't build the patio. We have a much smaller stage building. We're going to rebuild the stage building, tear it down and rebuild it. But what we rebuild will be much closer to the size of what we have now. It'll be a little bit bigger, but mostly it'll be bigger to the back. It won't be bigger to the sides. And so we lose a lot of square footage, which is expensive. But we still end up with a modest expansion of the dressing rooms and an expanded lobby. We don't get a loading dock. There's an alternative approach. It isn't quite as convenient. And the rest of it is mostly the same. In terms of ADA access, we lose ADA access to the front row seats. And we have ADA accessible seating in the back of the theater, but with very good sight lines. And the theater will be a little bit smaller. So the back row might be a few feet closer. I'm not sure if it is. In any event, it's very good sight lines. It just wouldn't be there wouldn't be ADA accessible seating in the front, it would just be in the back. So we get a lot of bang for our buck. This is about 25 or 30% less expensive than Plan A. I'll show you the cost of this in a few minutes. And then Plan C is a further reduction. We lose the expanded and improved lobby. We don't get equal building access. We don't get ADA accessible backstage. The HVAC is mounted on the ground behind the building, which is where it's currently mounted. It's not a great place to put it, but it's less expensive to do it that way. Plan C, as you'll see in a few minutes, doesn't really make a lot of sense because there's not a lot of donor support for Plan C. It's kind of too far down. So Plan C is actually going to cost the taxpayers just as much as Plan B because the donors will make up the difference. So it doesn't make, I don't think we're going to do too much consideration of Plan C going forward. You know, that may be wrong, but that's my guess. So those are the three plans. Now, what we're going to do with all of these plans, again, we're still on target to finish by 7. What we're going to do with all of these plans tonight is to show you the pros and the cons for Plan A, B, and C, and then the others. But right now, we're just going to do the pros and cons for Plan A, B, and C. And then we're going to say, what are the requirements for us to be able to make this feasible? And are those requirements currently today met? And what we want to see in that right-hand column, requirements met, are all green yeses. They're going to be green yeses. They're going to be red no's. They're going to be yellow maybes. And they're going to be question marks. And what we want to see is an option or 2 or 3 that say, yes, yes, these requirements are currently met. We could do this. And you're not going to see that. Every one of these 8 options has some no's and some maybes and some question marks. It doesn't mean that we can't ever do them, but currently, and you won't see, by the way, a lot of no's. You can see a lot of question marks. You can see a lot of maybes, not too many yeses. So we're sort of faced with the situation. Look, we've got these options, but we don't think really it's feasible yet to recommend them to the town. So let me just take you through these. So Plan A, what are the pros? It's the best functionality to preserve the building for the next 50 years. It preserves the historic building. It's the most expensive of the 3 plans. It's about $23 million. That doesn't mean that the taxpayers are going to pay $23 million, but that's what the plan roughly will cost. By the way, we believe that the cost estimates over the next work we're going to do over the next 3 months will likely come down a little bit by some amount. The architects are telling us that if we do more detailed cost estimation, we think the costs will come down. They're not going to come down to 10 million, but we think that they'll come down by a little bit. So this is probably the highest number that you'll see. At least we hope that. What would be required for the option to be feasible? Well, we're kind of just taking a rough stab at this. The taxpayers would probably need to be willing to support a bond of at least $7.5 million. And private philanthropy would need to be able to raise about $15 million. And we absolutely cannot stand here and say to you that we think this is definitely possible. We don't know if it's possible or impossible. We don't have feedback from the taxpayers. We do have feedback from the donors, the major donors. Major donors are not saying this is impossible, but they're also not committing yet to 15 million. So it would be irresponsible. We're just too early to say, let's go ahead with Plan A. Except, by the way, if we went ahead with Plan A, everyone would love the building. But unfortunately, if you remember those factors, it's not just historical preservation and ADA access and theater and sustainability, it's also cost. So that's where we are with Plan A. Plan B, what are the pros? Good functionality, a very significant improvement over today. It's more affordable, it preserves the historic building. It's the second most expensive of the plans. It's about $16.5 million. And here's an interesting dynamic. While Plan A is still on the list, some lead donors aren't yet willing to put all of their support behind Plan B yet, because they'd really like to get Plan A and they'd like to see if we could raise the money. Might be, this is a phone call. If I have a doctor's appointment, I probably won't take that. So that's where we are. So for that to be correct, for that to be feasible, for us to be able to recommend it today, the taxpayers would need to be willing to support a bond maybe of about 5.5 million. And the donors, we don't know if that's feasible or not. The donors would need to be able to raise 10 million. We think that's maybe, that's a little bit more than a question mark. We think it's possible. We're not confident of it, but we think it's not impossible. And we'd also need some of the lead donors to conclude that we can't do Plan A, because we certainly won't be able to raise 10 million until we can, for Plan B, until we conclude, if we do, that Plan A isn't affordable. Until then, there are some donors, which is great, I think, that want to really see, can we build this aspirational building? Can we raise enough money? Maybe the federal government can provide it. Maybe the taxpayers want to really support it. Maybe there's some lead donors that we haven't identified. All of those things are possible. So we can't yet recommend Plan B. And as I said, Plan C really doesn't make actually a lot of sense. It's the least expensive, but you don't save that much. It's about 14.9 million. You save about $1.5 million, but there's poor donor support for that. So the taxpayers would probably still have to support a $5.5 million bond, which we don't know whether there's support for that or not. I mean, I hope there is, but there may not be. But the lead donors won't be able to, aren't going to raise the rest. They're going to say, no, we don't want to do that. That's too far. That's what we think today. Their opinions could change. So we can't recommend, so we studied these 3 plans in detail. And unfortunately, today, doesn't mean 3 months from now, it won't be different, but today we can't yet recommend them. So we started to think about what other options should we begin to explore, at least so we have a wider range of options. And now let me go through those. Now remember that on these other options, we don't have detailed cost estimates. We don't have architectural drawings. We have conceptual ideas. And part of our work is for these next group of options to try to get some rough cost estimates to understand whether or not they're physically feasible and whether or not what it would cost. I mean, for example, if it, one of the options is to build a theater somewhere else. Well, if that theater somewhere else costs 46 million and means that this building would go into disrepair and we'd lose this building, no one's going to vote for it. But if it cost 1 million, which it won't, but if it did, then I think you'd say, well, versus 23 million, we could build a new theater for 1 million. Let's do that. Neither of those things is going to happen. But I'm just saying that's the analysis that we're going to try to do over the next 3 or 4 months. Okay, so we've got the first 3 plans. Here are the next 2 plans. Now these 2 plans still preserve the uses of town hall. They're still in town hall, and we still have community activities, municipal activities, and theatrical and cultural activities in town hall. So it achieves that simple purpose. Number 4 is the interim plan. This is the fast one. We don't know how fast, but it's the fastest one. Improve the theater seating and access and replace the HVAC system now. Make modest improvements to the offices. We need a break room and we need to fix the restrooms, but don't do anything else really on the rest of the project. Leave the stage building in place, reinforce it on the sides if we can, put in place the safety monitoring, and hope that a major event doesn't happen for a while, and hope that if it does, the building doesn't move, and we'll know whether it does. That is the interim plan, and it has some advantages. Jill?
During monitoring, we would put in place safety protocols. You said put in place safety monitoring.
I'm sorry, sorry, building monitoring and safety protocols. Building monitoring is checking to see exactly how much to the micrometer or whatever, how much the building has moved, and safety protocols, an announcement that closing the theater or an announcement that you can't be in the theater or that an event is coming and so forth. Thank you. And then the 5th option, which is I just call it an unusual option, but one that has been used significantly in London, is to retain the facade. Keep the front of the building so that if you're standing across the street, it looks like town hall, but rebuild everything behind it and rebuild it in a more efficient way. We don't know what that costs, but that's options 4 and 5. And let's just put those through the framework, see if we could recommend either of those. Option 4, what are the pros of the interim plan? It minimizes the chance of a pentangle shutdown. because it's the fastest plan. It provides an immediately upgraded theater experience. When you walk into the theater with the interim plan, you're going to go, oh, this is the nice theater. The seats are nice. There's more space. It's been painted. The lighting is better. You know, of course, this stage is still detached from the building, but it's not going to fall in on you if it's not a flood. It temporarily preserves the historic building, which gives us the option to continue to preserve it. And it's probably affordable in the short run. I say probably, we don't know what the feedback is from the town. But we think the cost of this plan is about $4.5 million, approximately. What are the cons? It's likely more expensive in the long run. There's a risk, for example, that the HVAC equipment that we put in, couldn't be reoriented to a new building if we had to do that. Safety protocols may need to stay in place and monitoring for a long time, because we don't know how long it is for the next event. What are the requirements? Well, the taxpayers would need to be willing to support maybe a $2.75 million bond, and the donors would need to be willing to raise $2 million or so. Now for a plan like this, we don't know if the donors would be willing to pay more than half for the project, because I think the expectation is that we're not done fundraising. Right? There's another project that might be, that some people would want. And so it's not exactly clear to us how much we could definitely get some. And there's a lot of generous people, I think, but we're sort of making up those numbers in the right-hand column. If the total project costs between $4.5 and $5 million, maybe it's split equally between the taxpayers and the donors, something like that. Is this possible? Maybe. I think that's a fair assessment, maybe. It's more than a complete question mark, but it's definitely not a yes or a no. Retain the facade. Well, that gives us the potential for a theater and offices that precisely meet our needs. This is an old building, and any of the plans we're doing, other than tearing it down or this one, gives us a theater that isn't perfect. It's just the best theater that we can build on this site with the existing constraints. I mean, there's certain things you can and can't do on the second floor for the municipal offices. And if we were to simply maintain the facade, we could design everything else precisely to what we need. And that would be a benefit. And it preserves part of the historic building, which is the front facade. Although, for those that know more about historical preservation than I do, I believe the front facade is not the most historical part of the building. It was not the original. So we could have a philosophical debate about whether that's historical preservation or not. What are the cons? Building a new building on unstable soil is possible, but it would be more expensive than building it on stable soil. Again, whether we build, we'd have to do those pilings, and that's going to be expensive. And it doesn't preserve the most historical parts of the building, which is everything behind the facade. What would have to be true for this option for us to recommend it? The new cost estimates would have to be done. We haven't done any, and it would need to show that it would be affordable. So we would try to get a rough sense of what that cost is. And it would also need to be true that a new building could be designed more efficiently with somewhat smaller square footage to meet our current needs. And that we think is true. We think that if money weren't an object and someone said, okay, build a new town hall for this many people on the municipal staff and for this type of theater production and these kind of meeting rooms, we could do it in fewer square feet. Just because we know exactly what we need and it would be a little bit more efficient. Sorry? Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have a conference room with, what is this, 18-foot ceilings?
No, we also wouldn't.
Oh, we wouldn't have a third floor, right? How many, just by show of hands on people in the room, how many people have been upstairs to the third floor? Okay, almost everyone. So it's beautiful, or once was beautiful space up there. We wouldn't rebuild that.
Elegant storage.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, it's actually, for those that can't hear, elegant storage was the comment. Yeah. So we're not ready to recommend this. So plans 4 and 5. We can't recommend them yet. And then we have the last 3 plans. And these last 3 plans do not retain the use of the building in all of its current uses. It starts to cut back on those. It says, we've exhausted the options for keeping town hall with all of its 3 purposes. Now we're going to look at doing a little bit less than what we're currently doing in this building. Nobody likes this, but we haven't been able to recommend yet the first 5, so we felt we needed to. Jason, I'm going to come back to your there's some comments about other options and so forth. When we go to the feedback sessions, considering other options is absolutely on the agenda. If people want to say option 3 is terrible, but you should have an option 9, we're not going to do that tonight. But I mean, we're not going to have a lot of time to do that tonight, but that is absolutely part of the feedback process if the new options to consider. So options 6, 7, and 8, convert to a movie theater. Now, this option is not because people don't like live theater. It's because the unstable part of the building is the part that's on the stage. If there were just a wall there, the structural problems of the building would be largely solved. So what you would do here is demolish the stage, but not replace it with millions of dollars worth of new square footage. You just replace it with a wall. And you'd need to do a little bit of structural piling to reinforce that end of this building, but it's not significant. It's a much, much lower cost. So demolish the stage building, but don't replace it, and then upgrade the theater and the HVAC system. The 7th option, move the theater, shut down the theater space, maintain the offices, maintain the lobby, but basically make this a municipal building and move the theater and Pentangle to a new location. I see Allison is sort of shaking her head as if, you know, boy, I hope we don't have to do this. And I don't think there's anyone who would hope any different. And even to go further, if you want an option that you would hope even less, is to move everything. Get rid of this building, sell it to a developer, although early discussions we had just to get information suggest that we're not going to get a lot of money for it. The land is worth something and the building is worth negative. And it probably nets out to something close to 0. There's not a big financial windfall there. But find new locations for the theater and the offices and sell or demolish this building. Again, no one hopes for that to happen. Okay, let's just quickly go through and then we'll talk about next steps. Convert to a movie theater. What's the reason? What's the pro? It's a more affordable option to maintain some Pentangle operations in the building. If it still maintains culture in the building. The con is we lose live theater. By the way, that's just 3 little words. We lose live theater. I know there's some people who, I mean, maybe one of them is like, oh my God, that's horrible. But what would have to be true for this to be recommendable? Well, we'd need cost estimates. We don't know what this would cost or how much it would save. We'd need to know that the cost was affordable, and Pentangle and the community would need to be willing to retreat from live performances. And most donors would need to be willing to fund a more limited scope. And right now, I would say most donors would have a problem with that, most of the lead donors. So we can't yet recommend this one. Close off the theater, Pentangle moves. This is probably the least expensive option for taxpayers, because when Pentangle moves, the taxpayers don't have to pay for the new theater. You could maintain this building as a kind of a half building. I mean, physically, it would be the full building. You'd have the municipal offices, which are structurally sound. We could improve, and put in a break room and restrooms and so forth, but just shut off the theater. And then donors would need to fully fund the theater in a new location. We don't know if that's possible. Taxpayers would be willing to support, we estimate maybe a $1 million bond. We need a new HVAC system, but it would be for a much smaller, fewer number of people and a smaller space. We said that's maybe. And voters would need to be willing to support the loss of the building as a community center, the fact that, to do all the things we do here now. And we don't know that certainly don't have confidence that that's true. So we can't recommend option 7. And then option 8, sell town hall, move to new locations. This is also an inexpensive option for taxpayers because the theater, again, would presumably be privately funded. And it's only the municipal offices that would need to be paid for by the taxpayers. And frankly, the taxpayers, we could rent space and maybe not even build a building if the primary objective we cared about was cost. It's an inexpensive option for taxpayers. We would, if we got a theater, it would be a theater that precisely met our needs because it would be built from scratch. If it were to be put in a place like the East End, which, you know, we're not making any recommendations or decisions, but there's obviously not a lot of big open space within walking distance of the center, and most of it is at the East End in a couple of different parcels. It could improve that development, and it also opens up the possibility of redevelopment of this site if it could be turned into housing or something of that sort. What are the negatives? We'd lose the historical building. All the functions might not be located in one place. The building might not sell. What would need to be true? Taxpayers would need to be willing to support $50,000 to $100,000 a year in rent for offices, which now we wouldn't have a building, so you'd have to build a building, but I think it'd be cheaper to rent. That's equivalent to a $1 to $2 million bond, so it's a relatively inexpensive option. The voters would need to be willing to support this option, and the donors would need to be willing to build a new theater. And well, most of those options, you know, would the taxpayers be willing to support $50,000 to $100,000 in rent? Maybe, but would they be willing to support this option? We have no idea. So we can't recommend option 8. So we've got 8 options. By the way, you could think in your mind, well, what if we combined a part of option 7 with a part of option 8 to get option 7 prime? There are many more options, but we're trying to kind of lay out the big choices that we have. And obviously, I bet that the final plan that we do won't be precisely any one of these if we ever get to a solution. It'll be some combination of some, but it'll be closer to one than to the other. Okay, those are the 8 options. So now I just want to take a minute, we've got 3 minutes left, to explain the next phase of work, how you can learn more and how you can provide feedback, not just questions or clarifications tonight, but actual feedback. We love this, we hate this, why didn't you think about, or can you think about option X, Y, or Z? It's pretty straightforward. The first thing we're going to do is get more detailed cost estimates for option 2. Doing that gets us a lot of information about option 1, because a portion of it is pretty similar. We're building. So, and we're prepared to work with the architects to get quite detailed cost estimates, and we're hoping that those numbers will be lower than the numbers that we got in the first rough estimation. We would try to get rough cost estimates for options 4 through 8. Remember, option 3 was Plan C. Again, if we get detailed cost estimates for option 2, Plan B, we're gonna, Hank, would you agree that if we get Plan B, we'll have a lot more insight into Plan A and Plan C? Yeah. So it's an efficient way to. Hank is the building committee part of the team that's working on it. So more detailed cost estimates for Plan B, option 2, rough cost estimates for options 4 through 8. If there is interest, additional briefings in greater detail, just information briefings, not debating about what to do. The architectural options, we have drawings for these. We have some elevations. We have, you know, details that you can see if you're interested. We can have a briefing on that. The building structural issues and systems issues. I know that there's some geotechnical engineers in Woodstock who indicated, you know, they've started to read the reports and would say, you know, gee, we'd like to talk a little bit more about this. That's great. Detailed cost estimates and trying to understand, I mean, how could it possibly cost $23 million just to build a building? We could take you through that. Or if the community doesn't feel, or the select board of trustees don't feel that you need more information, that's okay too. It's there if you would like it. And then several public meetings to seek feedback on the choices. The things that you want to do tonight, we're going to do at the next meetings. And those meetings are really for us to listen. What trade-offs do you think are most important? And what are, you know, and if you have other ideas for what we could do, that would be fine too. And then we would give another briefing like this in about 3 months. 3 to 4 months. I just, as we've sort of talked about all the work that needs to get done, not a year, but not a week. So it's 10 seconds before 7 o'clock. And we're going to turn to Q&A. And we want the questions to be focused on understanding the options, not yet advocating for or against them. And you'll see, by the way, that we're not advocating for or against them either. We're just trying to lay them out. So I'm going to turn it back to Mary. And am I turning it back to you?
Yes,
Okay.
for now.
Right. And then we're going to say that if you are going to ask a question, if you can
Come up to the table.
maybe come up to here, it might be close, a little bit
Okay,
closer.
that's
Come up to
fine.
here and just stand there and so that the people who are remote can meet.
So we have about
And-
20,
What are we doing about the what questions that are on?
Yeah, no, Jill Davies is we're going to alternate between in the room and online.
Oh, so I'd like to put a request. I want to put a request in for everybody on Zoom. We have 3 pages of attendees. So if you want to ask a question, if you can raise your hand electronically, it would be very helpful. So you just go to the bottom of your screen where there's emoji for reactions, and then you can see the opportunity to raise your hand. That would be the easiest way for us to include you in the discussion. And the plan is to go from the audience to Zoom alternately. So if you're ready with your questions, we can call on you.
you'll have 1 minute to ask your questions. You address them, please direct them to John. Raise your hand as Jill explained. You'll be called on and muted after 1 minute. You'll each have 1 minute to talk. There will be no discussion and no debate, as I spoke earlier. Select women and men and village trustees, you'll be given the first opportunity. We will end at 7:30 p.m. And thank you all. So Jill,
What do you want to give the select board and trustees
Yes.
the first? Bill.
Hey, John, you mentioned $4 million in pledged. Can you tell us or give us a rough idea of how much has come in and actually is in the bank? And then of that, how much has been spent so far?
Yeah, Wendy, do you want to take that question? I can answer this, how much is spent. About $160,000 has been spent so far. About maybe about 160,000. Wendy, do you want to take that part of the question? But you're muted, Wen.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
So we've received 2.4 million so far,
Of the 4 million in pledges.
right?
Yeah, so at the next briefing in 3 to 4 months, will we get a sense of the timelines for the different stages? I mean, it basically, 2023 would be the first realistic opportunity to have a bond vote. And then how long would it take from then until those different ones are done? I'm just throwing that out as something.
Yeah.
Great to hear the next briefing. I know you have some of that information.
Yeah, I think we have always thought about it. Well, always for the last 4 months, we have been thinking that a bond vote would happen in March of 2023. We haven't discussed this as a team, but there is a bit of a wrench in that plan, and that the Pentangle board has suggested an interim plan. And we haven't talked about what the implications on the timing are of that. It certainly wouldn't be later than March of 2023. So I would say right now, the only timing we've talked about is a bond vote in March of 2023.
But then timelines beyond that.
Timelines beyond that, yes, I think when we would be ready to put, certainly when we'd be ready to put a bond vote to the community, but maybe well before that, we would have timelines. We originally had a timeline for Plan A. It's just roughly speaking, it'll take about a year of construction, just roughly speaking, and you can't begin construction until after the bond vote. So just to give you an order of magnitude sense of timing.
Thank you.
Jill, I saw a trustee who is.
No, Kareem has his hand up, but nobody else does. So
All right, hold on 1 second, Jill, then we're
Well,
gonna,
there was a trustee that was remote, but there wasn't a question there, Jill.
I don't see any other hands. So
Okay, Seaton has a question.
Have you, just thinking about other things that are going on in the village and the town in terms of fundraising and major projects, have you all been communicating, coordinating with other, like the high school group that had communications, because things are happening at the same time?
Right.
So have you been in coordination or communication with that group?
Is there someone on the leadership team who wants to take that?
I would like to take that.
Right.
I'm on the capital budget committee, and the capital budget committee is the team that is looking at all the different projects in the town together. So tonight is just about the town hall, but come December, we should be ready to look at everything that is happening in the wastewater plants and everything else that we're doing, or that we would like to do.
Brenda, do you have anything? John? Okay, then I think everyone here is at the table, select board and trustee people.
Okay, let's do a couple online, and then
So
there's
why
a
don't we
couple
do, yes,
people here.
we've
Go
got people here who would like to, so.
Okay, so
Go now.
Kareem, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, please. So my question, by the way, thanks, John, is, super clear as usual. Thank you. My question is, it relates to the amount of the donations that seem to get reduced as we start to step away from focusing, less on the theater, right? Obviously, so I'm kind of guessing what the incentive is there for the donors, but it's just me assuming, right? So it would be interesting in the options that you laid out, the first and the second one, obviously, because we said we're going to steer away from the third one, to be able to segregate from the costs, i.e. the 23 million, for example, if that ends up being the number. What are absolute must-haves? And in those, I include the structural fixes, the HVAC cost, and not at a standard +1, right? And then the ADA compliance accessibility issue. If we can segregate those costs, at least we can compare those sort of must-haves to the value of what potentially might be a bond. And then maybe that might change the conversation a little bit with the donors.
Kareem, okay, thank you, Kareem.
Yeah, I think a sense. I agree. I think, and I assume some of us, not me, are taking notes about suggestions that are being made for the work that we're going to do over this next phase. Kareem, I think that suggestion seems perfectly reasonable. And I think defining, I think defining what we would need to do from a legal perspective, defining what we would need to do from a building safety perspective, and then defining what people might want to pay for are all minimums that we should try to identify. And I think we would be able to do that. I think we have some good insights into it. I'd be reluctant to say tonight exactly what that is, because we haven't talked about it as a team, but I think that's a good deliverable to have.
Well, I think, John, if I can interrupt and say that that's what we attempted with Plan C.
Yeah, I think that is what we attempt. So,
Do you have another remote? Jason?
Yes, from Jason, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thanks, Jill. I was curious, John, if we're eligible, if you found out we're eligible for any historic tax credits for this project.
well, when you say historic tax credits, you also want to include grants for historic preservation in that question, or are you specific about tax credits?
All the above.
Both, yeah. The answer is yes. We're definitely eligible for historic grants, and we're working with the State Historical Preservation Office. We think that for a project that touches most of the building, that the grant revenue funding that might be available is in the order of magnitude of $500,000, 400 to 600,000. We've looked at what other towns have done to renovate their town halls. And we've talked to the State Historical Preservation Office. There are 10 major grants that we could apply for. The Historical Preservation Office will help us to apply for those. They administer most of them. So, and they're quite interested in helping. I don't know that affects, that there's any favoritism involved, but sort of their job is to work on projects like this with communities. So we're working with them, and it's early stages, but I think a reasonable estimate of that money is 500,000. Now, it could be more than that. It's not going to be 5 million from the traditional things. And, you know, when we're talking about plans in the trillions of dollars, there's really no way to know how much, if any, money would be available beyond the normal things. We will explore all of them.
Tax credits, yes.
I'm sorry, and with respect to tax credits, Allison, maybe there's actually a question as to whether a municipal owned building can apply for tax credits. A building that's owned by a commercial enterprise and a building that's owned by a not-for-profit can get tax credits. We're right in the middle of it. Someone just raised this a week ago, and we're trying to figure out whether or not a municipal owned building, which this is entitled to tax credits, which would be another type of funding on top of grants for historical preservation.
Thank you.
I think this had, oh, sorry, she had.
Please state your name and come up by the microphone, please.
My name is Karen Emerson. Thank you. It was extremely informative. Does the high school have its own auditorium? I noticed that the National Honor Society inductees is happening in the Pentangle this evening when we came in. And so I was wondering, does this theater, you know, provide services for the entire community, including the school?
From time to time, should I?
Yeah, go ahead, Mary. Yes.
From time to time, there are presentations and performances, and like tonight's induction into the NHS that happen here at Town Hall. The elementary school often uses the stage here as well. There is an auditorium, was dedicated to a teacher about 20 or 30 years ago. But the auditorium there has been in existence. It's been renovated a couple times minorly, but in both places.
So this is extremely, the theater here is even more important to the community than
It
I
is.
realized.
Excuse me, I think Jason should comment on this as well, given the plans that are ideas that are going on for a new school building. Jason?
This is
Sure.
where we want to have this debate.
Well, it's not a debate. Jason, just.
No, it's not. It's,
1 minute,
it's,
just-
it's fact, yeah, it's factual.
You can answer my question. I have two other statements, questions. The first is,
How's our time, Jill? Yeah,
Bill is recording time.
okay.
are we required to follow the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation on this building? And also, there's going to be a lot of money for the arts. However, because of the fact that this is a municipal owned building, has anybody looked into the fact that it's going to be harder to get money to fix this building as opposed for money for the arts? Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will say that the funding team is the grants that we're pursuing and so forth. The Pentangle, Alita Wilson and her colleagues, but really it's Alita who's driving it, is completely involved in the grant applications. And some of the grant applications that have been made so far are for arts programming or for arts that we can think that we can apply to some aspects of the project. So we're not, historical preservation, arts, and environmental improvements are the three major areas for grants that we're pursuing. So we certainly won't forget that. I do think that Jill, I think, was right. There is an important fact, I don't know what it is, about future auditorium capacity. And Jason, if you could literally in 1 minute just say what the high school plans aren't set, but what the scope of the auditorium in the new high school could be. And let's not have a debate about it, it's just as a fact.
Yeah, sure. There is an existing Yo theater in the school that's used by a very well-regarded theater program that's been around for 20 or 30 years. It's been growing in popularity, and it's led by a dynamo of a theater director. And within the plan for the new middle school and high school, there is a new state-of-the-art, I believe it's 450 seat theater that's planned that will be community accessible. It's designed to be community accessible so that the rest of the school can be closed off and the facility can be utilized after hours.
Okay, thank you. Okay, oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Mary's calling on people. so-
And we're gonna go there now. Do you have a question, Jill?
No, we do have no more questions.
All right, Rich Kozlowski.
Thank you, Mary. As you said, I'm Rich Kozlowski. Great job to the committee. Good news is interest rates are low. We'll see where they are in 2023. But when in your estimates of bond, did you see how that would affect tax rates based on today's interest rates?
We have done some calculations of, and obviously when we would get closer to a time when we're saying this is what we think the bond, we'd like to ask for a bond, we would clearly explain that in terms of the average taxpayer. But I can tell you this, just in terms of a rule of thumb, order of magnitude, Woodstock raises about $5 million per year from property taxes, 5 million. To pay off a $1 million bond costs $50,000 a year, so about 1% increase in property taxes. So on average, and this isn't true precisely for everyone, but on average, whether it's a bond for the town hall or a bond for the high school or a bond for the sewer system, $1 million bond raises your property taxes by 1%. So a $2 million bond, wait for it, raises your property taxes by 2%. The order of magnitude at current interest rates. That's a very rough, it's not exactly that, but that's to kind of give you a sense. Thank you.
Roger's had his hand up a couple times. Roger,
So I'm just curious, and I
please,
don't know.
please give your name.
My name is Roger Logan. Before this 1928 extension was put on, I assume there was an auditorium of sorts downstairs. Is that correct?
Before,
Before
Yes.
the theater?
yes,
So do we know how that was configured in the sense, was there a stage, were there fewer seats?
Yeah,
Jill,
actually, there was a theater, but it was upstairs.
Okay, what was downstairs in that space?
A meeting hall.
a meeting, just a meeting.
Was there a
space.
stage of some sort?
No, there was just a three,
Just like this,
Yeah.
essentially? Okay, thank you.
in fact, town meeting, when I first came to Woodstock, town meeting was at the high school in the gymnasium.
Okay.
Zoe,
Good evening, I'm Zoe Parent. I wanted to know if you have some sense if most of the movement in the back happened during Irene or during some of the larger events that have happened, given that they feel like that's what might cause most of the future movement?
I need to ask any of the members of the committee. I don't know that question. We were not, I believe it's correct to say that we were not monitoring it during Irene or the period prior. So I don't think anyone knows.
I think that's the correct answer, John. The monitoring devices have only gone on in the last few years, so anything is surmised.
However, I would say that the engineer did say that the floods contributed to the movement. It's not that it was tracked at every moment, at every event, but that is how they are explaining the movement. That there's always some natural settlement when you build on a new structure, but the unusual amount of separation is because of the particular kind of porous soil that the building sits on, and the fact that they were next to the river, and that we've had 7 floods in the last 120 years.
I would, Regina Lawrence.
please come up.
Regina Lawrence, I just wanted to add that I remember distinctly when the 40-year renovation was done to the theater. there was an awareness then that that stage block was fragile, deteriorating. The mortar and the bricks was not solid, and it was an issue at that time, but it was not able to be addressed in addition to everything else, adding the basic ADA at that time. But that's a long-standing, I'm sure it's been exacerbated by Irene. And anytime you have a silt, a movement, that would be a increase in the danger. But it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Thank you,
No.
Gina.
Thank you.
And I'll just add that when the original main block was built, they noticed movement almost immediately. And so when the 1928 addition was added, they actually put buttresses on the back of the building and fill to try to shore up the back end of the main block. So even from the get-go, they knew there was a problem, and they tried to solve it. And actually, the engineers say that by putting in the fill, they exacerbated the problem underneath the stage house. So they, 100 years ago, they weren't as technologically astute as our engineers are today. And so their solution was not the perfect one. But yes, almost from the beginning, they knew that there was a problem with the site.
Thank you, Wendy. Anyone else here? Zoe, let's see if there's any others. Do you have any other questions, Jill?
No, none.
Zoe wants to ask another.
Just another curiosity question. It sounds like you're hoping that with this renovation that the building will have more use, that it would be more comfortable, more convenient for people. Have you considered parking, given that it's already tight when we're have an event already?
We have not talked about parking yet.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question.
All right,
I think
Allison Clarkson.
Thanks. Whoop. I think I just Allison Clarkson, hi. No thoughts about savings. How much will we save once we have a more efficient, sustainable building? Surely we will save some money too.
yes. So in about for the last 3 or 4 months, we had the equivalent. We had $50,000 a year in operational savings as an estimate, which translates to, as go back to the tax discussion, translates about to $1 million capital, a bond. So in effect, if we needed to raise, X million dollars from donors or the town, we could count on raising X minus 1 million, because we would have operational savings that would pay back a bond. However, more recent discussions, which were not conclusive, they were sort of, at least from my knowledge, if anyone else on the team knows, my knowledge, they were sort of in passing. I saw an email go by from our HVAC consultant, who's, saying, which is where the savings, mostly savings would come from HVAC and insulation, that it's very, very tricky to count on these kinds of operational savings in projects because other things always happen. And I don't know, we haven't. So I don't know whether or not we're going to be able to put the $1 million into the equation or not. My guess is it's somewhere between 0 and 1 million. It's not 5 million. I hope it's not 0. That's what I can tell you right now. Unless, is there anyone else on the team who knows more than that?
The only thing that I would add is that one of the additional factors is our desire to improve the air quality. So it's not simply a matter of saving energy for the heating and air conditioning that we have now, but we want to improve the air quality, and that requires more investment. So that's an offsetting factor.
And we have, as we approved at town meeting a few years ago, our regional intermunicipal energy coordinator probably has more information, but he is not available tonight. And I know that he pays close attention to the changes and any improvements in energy.
Yeah.
And there have been some over the last few years, and that continues to be very important.
Before we close, Mary, could I just make one last comment? I am able to avoid doing most work on this team, but I'm good at PowerPoint. So I end up giving a presentation, but there are 10 people on a team that have been working really for the last couple of years. And I just want to say who those people are, because that's where this presentation came from. I just drew up the PowerPoint slides. So Jill Davies, Jill Rose, Mary Riley and Bill Kervin representing the select board in the town, Wendy Spector, Hank Savelberg on the building committee, Tom McCoy and Alita Wilson from Pentangle, and myself. And that's the group, and all of us are available to be, to talk to and so forth, but that's the group that did the work and is continuing to do it.
Alita is not here tonight because her daughter is being inducted into the National Honor Society. I want to say that as well. So it looks like all of our,
Oh, just one question. John, will this presentation be available on the website?
Yes, it's been recorded, and it'll be available on the website.
Thank you.
And also, Jill, I need to give you the PowerPoint as well, if people want to refer to that. We'll get that up also. Yeah.
thank you, Jill, and thank you all for coming tonight and participating. Watch for future events of this type and be sure to join us again. And as time goes on, we'll learn more and we will advise you accordingly. And there is no other business for us this evening, so I will, for the select board, this meeting stands adjourned.
For the village trustees, this meeting stands adjourned, and thank you, John.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all.